In today's video, we're taking a look at some off-season trade talk involving some teams like the Buffalo Sabres, the Calgary Flames, Philadelphia Flyers, and the Seattle Kraken. Plus, we have lots of updates around NHL playoffs, some injury updates, some more milestones, and a suspension as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk to take a look at here today. First up, we had some more milestones take place in last night's NHL action. It's been a common trend here across the league the past few days, but again, we had the Boston Bruins continuing to set records and have a phenomenal record-setting season. They now have the single-season record for most points in a season. So obviously, they picked up yet another victory last night. They have most wins, most points. Just an absolutely crazy season for the Boston Bruins. It's going to be really interesting to see how they make out in the playoffs. You would think, based on how the regular season has gone, that they should be able to steamroll anybody because beating them 4 times in one series, you would think would be impossible. But crazier things have happened, and it will be fun to watch in the playoffs to see how they make out. Be curious to see, once we know here the next day or two, exactly who their first opponent is going to be. Very well could be the New York Islanders, who are trying to play in clinch tonight. They're playing the Montreal Canadiens. As I record this video, they're up 1-0. Still early. I think we're halfway through the first period. So the long ways to go. If the Islanders win, they are in. Or even if they lose in overtime, they are in. And they more than likely will be the Bruins' first round opponent. We also saw Canucks forward Elias Pettersson hit the 100-point plateau last night. So a big milestone for him. He's certainly come a long way, even though the team itself has had a disappointing season. Pettersson himself has had a phenomenal breakthrough year, taking his game to another level here yet again, and continues to show that he's probably, I think, fair to say, one of the league's more underrated players, putting up those types of numbers for sure. So great season for Pettersson. Nice to see for sure. And Jack Hughes, of course, in New Jersey, with his brother Luke making his NHL debut last night, set the Devils record for points in a season. So we'll see if he has a chance as well to possibly hit 100 for the season. He's only a couple shy after last night's action, but he now holds the record for most points in a season by one single New Jersey Devil player. So quite a feat. He seems to do special things, especially when his brothers are in attendance. So we'll see how things go. But Luke had a pretty solid game as well for his first NHL game. So as I mentioned last night, we saw the Winnipeg Jets clinch the final playoff spot in the West, beating the Minnesota Wild with a regulation victory. Obviously, we're going to talk further about that game here in just a moment because things get a little out of hand in the third period. But we know now who the 8 teams are in the Western Conference. We don't know the exact seeding just yet, so the matchups are not fully finalized. But the Jets claimed that last spot was a must-win. Pittsburgh, however, had a game against Chicago, and they completely blew it. They probably are going to lose out on their chance to make the playoffs now because their last 2 games are against Chicago and Columbus. And I think the Islanders, after losing to Washington, which you could argue that's a game they should have won as well, and didn't really show up with a very solid effort. Now that they thought they were probably dead in the water, looking at the Penguins' schedule, and then the Penguins go and lose to Chicago. So now if the Islanders beat Montreal tonight, which is their final game, they're in. Like I said, even if they lose in overtime, they're in. They just need to pick up at least 1 point. So that is, I don't know what to think of Pittsburgh. You got to think that their window is all but closed, and Ron Hextall is going to be, feeling the heat, and wonder what's going to come next for them. But they're not officially out yet, but it could be after tonight. And of course, after last night's action with the Penguins losing, that clinched a spot for the Florida Panthers, who are more likely going to clinch anyways, but just made it official. So the Panthers are in with the Penguins' loss. The Sabres, of course, played the Devils and lost, so the Sabres are now officially out. Again, like I said, the Atlantic Division is getting that much stronger with Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit all showing improvement this year. Ottawa, of course, right behind the Sabres, just a couple points, but they're both going to end up missing out here. Sabres are, obviously more likely going to finish slightly ahead of them, but certainly going to make that division that much more competitive for the next year and years to come here, as well as those teams show a lot of improvement here as well. Now, in yesterday's video, we talked about a young man who traveled from the Toronto area. He was in Florida to see his heroes, the Maple Leafs, Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews. He had a sign down at the glass. I showed it here on the screen that was caught during pregame warmups. And, of course, his family had traveled to Florida, probably for a spring vacation, I assume. And his sign said that he come from all the way from Toronto to see his heroes. And of course, Marner and Matthews were not even in the lineup. They're having a rest, like a load management type of night. And I was just talking about the fact how I understand why teams do this. I get it from a business perspective. But from a fan's perspective, it really sucks when you spend a lot of money to see certain players, especially, or your favorite players, and you find out that's the reason. It's bad enough to find out they're injured or something, and it's something beyond their control. But, for that reason, it just really stings, and I just felt really bad for the young man. But the right people did see it. The team and players got wind of it, which is good, and they did make good, which the hockey players quite often do. Blake was the young man's name. He got to go back and meet Matthews and Marner both. They both signed his billboard sign that he had made, and they also gave him a signed stick, and they signed his jersey he was wearing, and all kinds of cool stuff. And they got to take some pictures, and so at least he did get to see his heroes, and at least they did make good on a situation that I thought could have been, really sour taste for the family after going all that way. But at least, we get to see the game. Of course, the Leafs pick up the victory, which is good for him as a fan, and then he gets to meet his other hero players that weren't on the ice afterwards. So that's certainly great to see. And as I mentioned, we had a wild game in Winnipeg and Minnesota. I'm not going to go into great detail because I did do a video earlier talking about, because we did have a suspension and a fine come from the things that happened here. But ultimately, it started, with my opinion, with Ryan Reeves delivering a boarding dirty type hit on Dylan DeMello. It was uncalled. Nothing happened from it. Nothing from player safety. Nothing from the refs. Then that followed up from there. Nick Ehlers was forechecking, a regular everyday hit on Kirill Kaprizov. Nothing bad came from that hit at all. Puck comes up ice. Ehlers is skating hard, back checking, and Ryan Hartman gets the puck. There's a little quick one-touch pass to get rid of it. Braced himself and just nailed Ehlers, who was not even suspecting or going to be looking for contact. I know some people are convinced from Wild fans that he was going to run right over Hartman. That's not what he was doing. He was hustling back to get back in the neutral zone and in his defensive zone because the puck was going the other way. So Hartman was called for interference, and he was given a one-game suspension. Ehlers was injured on the play as well. I don't know the full extent of things. Of course, the other thing that happened in the game is in the final minutes, Neil Pionk was fined $5,000, was also penalized on the play as a major penalty for cross-checking as well on Marcus Johansson. It was a dangerous cross-check and hit into the boards and behind the net, and that was certainly justified as well. But then the Wild then countered Dean Evison with mere seconds left on the clock after everything, puts out Ryan Reeves and Marcus Foligno to start a bunch of fights at the end of the game, which to me was completely unnecessary, uncalled for. The game was over. The refs obviously at this point had lost control, though. They weren't, in my opinion, doing a great job at keeping things under control anyway. And all pandemonium ensued. So we have a suspension for Hartman, a fine for Pionk, and a rivalry renewed. Certainly these guys have met in the playoffs before. They're not going to meet in the first round. We know that for sure. But if they're both successful in the first round, they could meet up in the subsequent round. So be curious to see when these teams do meet again. If it happens next year, we'll have to see. Obviously, these teams could have changes. It might look different. The intensity may or may not continue to be there, but we'll see. The signings as well today. The Carolina Hurricanes signed a prospect goaltender from the college hockey scene, actually from Quinn Piniak, would have been a teammate of Ron Brindamore's son, Skylar Brindamore, who was on that team who just won the national championship. A goaltender prospect, Yanis Perret. I think it P-E-R-E-T-S, so they spell his last name. I assume it's either Perret or Perret. He had a solid college run, obviously national champion, gets an entry-level contract with the Carolina Hurricanes. Obviously, I don't know what kind of role Rod Brindamore played in that signing, but I know it's a player. Obviously, anybody on that team, he would have seen plenty watching his son play, so he would have had a lot of first-hand look at him. So we'll see, where he ends up and what kind of impact he'll have on their organization. But an interesting goalie prospect for them, somebody a little bit older, a little bit more mature, who's never been drafted. So we'll see how that works out. And the Florida Panthers also signed right shot defenseman Mike Benning, also comes from the college scene. He comes from the University of Denver, though. He was a Panthers draft pick back in the fourth round in the 2020 NHL draft, but he's now officially signed and on his ELC. Now, on the trade rumors section of the video, I want to start by looking at Tony DeAngelo and Billy. I know we've talked about the Flyers kind of off and on here over the past couple of weeks. DeAngelo is a name getting a lot of I've mentioned now in the rumor mill, I think it's fair to say that his time in Philly's probably come to an end. He's been a healthy scratch. I think it's like the last 5 or 6 games. He's not going to play. Tortorella's not putting him in the lineup. We've heard remarks from different coaches saying, I think it was Rocky Thompson, assistant coach, one day when he had a turn at being head coach when Tortorella was hanging out in the press box with Danny Briere, talking about how some players weren't really putting the effort in. And a lot of people believe that was geared, those comments were geared at him, maybe others as well, but certainly one of the players that he was talking about for sure. And as much as he provides some offense, we know he's had some other character type issues in the past. Some off-ice stuff with teammates and whatnot, and kind of ended his time in the Rangers organization that way. Seemed to have a good year in Carolina last year, didn't really hear of any issues that we know of, at least publicly. And now in Philly, here we are. I don't know that anything's really happened per se. I think this is more about on-ice issues, that they're just not happy with how he plays. Like, as much as he produces offensively, he's not playing well defensively. He's never really been good defensively, so I'm not really sure what they were expecting when they got this guy, but at the same time, it's more of a Chuck Fletcher move, who's no longer with the organization too. But I would suspect that the Flyers and Tony DeAngelo will likely do part ways amongst, several other possibilities we might see in Philly this offseason. Whether they have to do a buyout or they can do a trade with salary retained or something of that nature. I think his time playing at home, because Philly is home for him, I think he was excited to come home and play. Just hasn't worked out, and doesn't sound like they really want anything to do with him, but we'll have to see how that plays out and develops. On the Jeff Merrick Show today, Jeff was talking to Lance Lozowski, Buffalo reporter, covering the Sabres, talking about all things Buffalo and how the season went. And one thing they were talking about, speculating a little bit, was the future of the goaltending position. Of course, we've seen Devin Levi come in after signing his contract, turning pro after playing a couple of years of outstanding college hockey. Is really, seems like he might be ready to either A, be the starter, or at the very least be in a 1A, 1B type of, situation in Buffalo, where he's ready for NHL action. I don't know that he really needs to go to the AHL. I mean, we'll see. But if he can keep up playing like he has in his small sample size, I would not think that he would spend time in the AHL. So if you think about the fact that they do have an abundance of goaltenders there now, they have obviously Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, UPL. They had Eric Comrie, Craig Anderson, obviously Malcolm Subban, I believe, is still in the organization. Then, of course, Levi now. And Anderson more likely isn't going to be coming back. There's a possibility he plays in the game on Thursday night against the Ottawa Senators. Might be the way for the organization is to give him one last game, especially playing his former team that he spent so many years at. Being a good way to send him off, so that might happen. But I don't think there's really any chance that Buffalo's going to bring Craig Anderson back on a contract next year. There's obviously, guys like when it comes to Subban, I would think probably not, unless they see him as a minor league option. There's even some belief now that there could be more changes than that. So Merrick and Lozowski were talking about potential changes, and if Levi is ready for full-time action, could they maybe move Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and maybe even Eric Comrie both? They both agreed that they didn't see Levi and Comrie being a tandem next year. They also thought with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen having probably decent value with there, that a trade might help them bring in area players of other areas. Now, one team that came up that Jeff Merrick thought would make a lot of sense was the Seattle Kraken. We know the Kraken have Philip Grubauer, and they have Martin Jones. Jones likely could be let go. He's a pending UFA, almost 34 years of age, so there's a chance that they don't bring him back. They do have Joey Daccord, though, in Seattle as well, who's 26 and putting up phenomenal AHL numbers. He's a very mature goalie. Obviously went to played some college hockey in the ASU. Spent some time in Ottawa, the Ottawa Senators organization, where he was mostly in the minor leagues. And unfortunately, they were not able to protect him in the expansion draft, which is how he ended up in Seattle. And 2 seasons in Seattle, he's yet to be a full-time NHL goalie. He's only been on call-up duty. They had to put him through waivers. And his AHL numbers are really good. I think if they have to go through another year putting him through waivers, he's probably going to be taken. That would be my guess. So I don't know. I mean, I know that I do agree with Merrick and Lozowski that there is some sense there, unless maybe they trade Daccord. I guess that's always a possibility. But I do know that Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen would have a supporter in Seattle, being that the former GM in Buffalo who drafted him, Jason Motterill, is an assistant GM in Seattle, was a big fan, really liked his game, and they felt that he would be very much open and bringing him in to work with Philip Grubauer to be, the 1-2 combo in the net in the Kraken organization next year. So that's a possibility to see, regardless if he ends up in Seattle or elsewhere. I do think it's quite likely we do see, at least one or two movements between the pipes in Buffalo. Maybe they bring in more of a veteran to work with Levi, and they go with that veteran and Levi as a tandem, and maybe they move Calgary and UPL both. That wouldn't be shocking. They also said that when it comes to potentially other players being moved or what other things we might see, there's probably not going to be a ton of moves in Buffalo because they obviously like a lot of the players they have. So they have a few holes to fill. And one name that came up that could be moved is Victor Olofsson, who's been pretty much a power play specialist, hasn't produced a lot of 5-on-5, but struggled with that part of the game, and is a player who's been a healthy scratch about at the end of the season as well, and that they felt could be somebody who's traded. I mean, he's a pretty consistent 20-goal guy the past couple of years, good on the power play. I think there'd be a market for him. It's just a matter of where he goes and what the return could be. But look for Victor Olofsson to maybe be a guy on the move here as well, out of Buffalo this offseason. And if the Kraken do make a trade for UPL or anybody else for that matter, and do not go with Decord and Grubauer next year, I would think that Joey Decord might be a trade piece for them, because at the end of the day, like I said, I don't know with the numbers he's put up, but he's going to get through the waivers next year if he's not the number 2 guy in the organization. So look for some potential moves in that front as well. And Calgary, another goalie who could be on the move is possibly Danny Vladar. I mean, we'll have to wait and see what happens with Calgary. We've talked a lot about them, or they'll be going to be a hot topic here leading into the offseason, knowing that they've greatly underachieved this year. There's a lot of speculation that, between Daryl Sutter, Brad Treliving, they may not both be back. They could both be gone. One could be back. We don't know. But we do know that Dustin Wolf is going to make his NHL debut tonight. His American Hockey League numbers over the past 2 years are phenomenal, and many feel that really can't keep him down there in the AHL any longer. He needs and deserves a chance to be an NHL goaltender, at least as a backup. So why not go with Dustin Wolf at the NHL level next year? And you really have Jacob Markstrom on a $6 million contract with a no-move clause. As much as you might be disappointed in his game this year, you're not moving him, which means you're going to end up having to move Danny Vladar, who didn't have the greatest season either. Goaltending was certainly a sore spot for the Flames this year. At the same time, though, Vladar does have some good recent history prior to that season. It's not like his numbers were that astronomically bad. I think there would be definitely a market for him. He could still be, I think, one of the better backup goalies in the league. So I don't think they'd have any issues moving him at all. And I wouldn't be shocked to see Calgary do that to make room for a guy like Wolf to be on the NHL roster next year. I'm not sure if they go the route of getting a draft pick or a prospect, or maybe another piece to help them in another part of the organization as well. But some definitely, I think there's going to be some interesting goalie moves as the offseason approaches. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here and more in the comments. We'll talk a little further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.